Hello friends, welcome to my audio tutorial. My name is Harshit Dwivedi. This one is a very short audio tutorial, and in this audio tutorial I will tell you about the sources of our constitution. We all know that many provisions of our constitutions, many important provisions of our constitution like fundamental rights, directive principles of state policy, federal scheme of governance, parliamentary government, rule of law, citizenship, cabinet system, these features have been borrowed from a lot of other constitutions of the world. So, step by step, I will tell you the source and the various provisions that have been borrowed from the other constitutions of the world. I will speak slowly so that you can make notes of it. So, starting. The very first source of our constitution was the Government of India Act of 1935. I repeat. The very first source of our constitution was the Government of India Act of 1935, as I have already told you that in my previous tutorial. That was about the Government of India Act of 1935. Now, the important points which were covered in the Government of India Act of 1935 are as follows. You can write it down. This audio tutorial is very important from the perspective of all examinations, because many a times in high frequency questions from this topic have been asked in various examinations. So the very first provision or feature that was borrowed from the Government of India Act of 1935 was the Office of the Governor. First feature, Office of Governor. Second feature, Judiciary, the court system. Second feature is the judiciary, the court system. Third feature, public service commissions. Fourth feature, emergency provisions. Fifth feature, federal scheme of governance. So I will repeat. The first feature is Office of Governor. Second feature, Judiciary, the court system. Third feature, Public Service Commissions. Fourth feature, Emergency Provisions. Fifth feature, Federal Scheme of Governance. So these were the features and the provisions that were covered under the Government of India Act of 1935. The second one is the US Constitution, United States Constitution. The very first feature borrowed from the United States Constitution was fundamental rights. Second feature, right to judicial review. I repeat, right to judicial review. Third feature, removal of the Supreme Court judges and High Court judges and Vice President. I repeat, removal of the Supreme Court and High Court judges and Vice President. Fourth feature, impeachment of the President. I repeat, impeachment of the President. So I will repeat the features. First one was the fundamental rights. Second one was the independence of judiciary. Third one was the right to judicial review. Fourth one was the removal of Supreme Court and High Court judges and the Vice President. Fifth one was the impeachment of the President. So the next source is the Japanese Constitution. Through Japanese Constitution, one major feature or provision has been borrowed, that is procedure established by law. I repeat, the feature borrowed from the Japanese Constitution is procedure established by law. The fourth most important source was the British Constitution. First feature borrowed from British Constitution was rule of law. First one, rule of law. Second, single citizenship. Third, legislative procedure. Fourth, cabinet system. Fifth, prerogative writs. I repeat, prerogative writs, spelling Prerogative G-A-T-I-V-E, prerogative, and then writs, W-R-I-T-S. I repeat, P-R-E-R-O-G-A-T-I-V-E, prerogative, and then writs, W-R-I-T-S. The next one is parliamentary privileges. That is, the sixth one is parliamentary privileges. The seventh one is bicameralism. The eighth one is parliamentary government. The next important source of the Indian Constitution was Irish Constitution, and the below provisions were borrowed from the Irish Constitution. The first one was the directive principles of state policy. The second one was the method of election of the president, and the third one was the nomination of members to Rajya Sabha. I repeat, features borrowed from the Irish Constitution. The first one was the directive principles of state policy. The second one was the method of election of president, and the third one was the nomination of members to Rajya Sabha. The next important constitutional source of Indian Constitution was Canadian Constitution. Important features of Canadian Constitution are as follows. First one, advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. I repeat, advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. The second one, appointment of state governors by the centre. Third one, vesting of residuary powers in the centre. Vesting of residuary powers in the centre. Fourth one, federation with a strong centre. Federation with a strong centre. So these were the features that were borrowed from the Canadian Constitution. The next important constitution is South African Constitution. The feature borrowed from the South African Constitution was procedure for amendment of the Constitution. I repeat, the first one was the procedure for the amendment of the Constitution, and second was the election of members of Rajya Sabha. The second one was the election of members of Rajya Sabha. The next important source of Constitution was Australian Constitution. The first feature borrowed from the Australian Constitution was concurrent list. Second feature, freedom of trade, commerce and intercourse. Second feature, freedom of trade, commerce and intercourse. Third feature, joint sitting of the two houses of parliament during the passage of an ordinary bill. I repeat, joint sitting of the two houses of the parliament during the passage of an ordinary bill. The next more important source of our constitution was Soviet Constitution, that is the USSR Constitution, which is now Russia. The ideas that were borrowed from the Soviet Constitution, the important features were fundamental duties. First one was fundamental duties, and the second one was the ideals of justice, that were the social justice, economic justice and the political justice that are mentioned in the preamble to the India. So two important features that were borrowed from Soviet Constitution. First one was the fundamental duties, and the second one was ideology of social justice, economic justice and political justice in the preamble. The next important source of Indian Constitution was the French Constitution. The first feature, or we can say the feature of republic, India being a republic, was borrowed from the French Constitution. Another important feature was that the ideas and the ideologies of liberty, equality and fraternity that are mentioned in the preamble was also borrowed from the French Constitution. So India is a republic, borrowed from French Constitution, and the ideologies of liberty, equality and fraternity that I mentioned in the preamble is also borrowed from the French Constitution. And the last but not the least source of the Indian Constitution is Weimar Constitution of Germany. I repeat, Weimar Constitution of Germany, spelling W-E-I-M-A-R, Weimar Constitution of Germany. The only feature borrowed from this constitution was the suspension of fundamental rights during emergency. Suspension of fundamental rights during emergency. This feature was borrowed from the Weimar Constitution of Germany. Now, many critics of our constitution have said that Indian constitution is not unique in its approach. They say that Indian constitution is a mixed constitution, is a very detailed document and is borrowed from constitutions from all over the world. That is, they want to imply that there is nothing new or innovative in the Constitution of India and everything has been taken from outside. However, if we go in detail, this thing is totally wrong. I mean, we cannot say that our constitution is not unique. It is right that our constitution makers and their forefathers, our forefathers of the constitution and the fathers of our constitution basically, it's right that they have borrowed provisions of our constitution from the constitution of other countries, but in order to apply them effectively according to the prevailing conditions of our country, many specific and detailed changes have been made into those provisions. That is, the provisions that have been borrowed from the other constitutions of the world, they are not being implemented as in the same manner as they are present in their countries. That is, the provisions have been borrowed, their basic ideology has been borrowed, but necessary changes have been made into those provisions so as to make them compatible to Indian conditions. So, in this respect, we can say that our constitution is very unique because almost all the provisions that are being borrowed from the other constitutions of the world, some sort of changes have been made in them in order to make them suitable to the Indian administrative context and scenario. So friends, in this tutorial I have told you about the various provisions that have been borrowed from the other constitutions of the world. I hope you liked this audio tutorial. My name is Harshit Dwivedi. I am signing off. I hope you are in good health and I will see you in my next audio tutorial. Thank you and have a good day.